Our mission is to help protect rainforests around the world, but actually any ecosystem. And a lot of this comes from this idea, based on our experience, that sound, it's the sound of our living planet. The acoustics that we're all sort of here to talk about are the kind of greatest untapped resource for doing that. So again, if our mission is to protect these areas, there's lots of different ways that people will take on trying to protect areas. We've heard about some of them so far. Satellites, of course, are a very effective way to measure it. It's probably the most effective way for us to see what's happened around the world, to see where the deforestation is. Camera traps, community reporting, aerial surveys, and drones, of course, are a solution to almost everything. But our solution uses acoustics, as you can see, and so the very moment that a chainsaw is used in the forest, the sound is picked up by a device up in the trees, transmits through the cloud to people on the ground who get an alert on their phone, and they're like, what? And they jump on their motorcycles, and they get out there, and they stop the loggers in the act, in this perfectly realistic rendition of exactly how it happens in the field. In order to do this, of course, we do need technology on the ground, as we were talking about. And so in this case, originally we used old smartphones, put them up in trees with solar panels and powerful microphones, so they're able to listen to all the sounds of the forest, pick it up, stream it up to the cloud, and of course do that. As mentioned before, there is cell phone service in a lot of the areas in the periphery of the forest. Of course, not everywhere, and we'll get to that later. But that's actually one of the most amazing things, is that you can protect the periphery, the most threatened part, using cell phone service. This is the first version of it being put together several years ago in the garage in Silicon Valley. It's a rite of passage for that. And here's one up on the tree with me putting it up there. But again, building something in San Francisco doesn't really mean much. Took it to Indonesia to test it into a given reserve that was actually threatened by illegal logging. This was several years ago, back in 2013. Put it up in the trees, and then on the second day we put it up there, actually picked up the sounds of chainsaws, and I just sort of wanted to show you this little video. You can probably relate to when you've been in the forest for like 2 days and suddenly it gets very, very real when you actually show up to try and stop the loggers on the other side of the hill. This was the very first time we ever were able to pick up the sounds of chainsaws and catch them in the act, really sort of 2 days into it. But this was actually quite effective, which we'll get into shortly. This is all about automated detection, so no one's listening, as you can see. This is what a chainsaw actually sounds like in a spectrogram. This should all be very familiar based on what you've seen. And of course, it's important to look at the way that this becomes a really telltale sign in the forest, even though the forest is, of course, quite loud, which we'll get to. But here's another example of how you use it, not just for chainsaws, taking it to Africa, to a place. This is actually a logging concession in Cameroon, where this road was actually, a vector for illegal exploitation of quite a few things. This is the one gate leading out from that road. These were the guys that were guarding it with all these endangered species that are behind it. And in fact, using the system, we were able to pick up the sounds of motorcycles on their way out in nighttime, and actually catch some folks on the way out. So I'm just sort of jumping through these stories really fast so I can get into one in a little bit more depth. Before we actually do that, I want to back up for a second and talk about the organization as a whole. I don't really need to sell any of you on the concept of trying to protect these forests, but looking at kind of deforestation for what matters. Deforestation, of course, is the second largest contributor to climate change, more than all the transportation put together. And illegal logging, of course, doesn't make up for all deforestation, but illegal logging is up to 90% of the logging in the forest. And of course, not all deforestation comes from illegal logging, but it's so profitable in so many areas around the world because they'll go in and take out the most expensive trees that they can make so much money from that. They will cut a road into the forest to extract that high-priced lumber, and that road then becomes the vector for wholesale destruction, in this case Brazil, of the forest around it. So if you can stop the illegal logging, you can stop the roads, and of course there's a mandate to stop illegal logging in a lot of places. And if you can stop the roads, you can stop the wholesale destruction, which might be the fastest way for us to fight climate change overall. So that's where our organization's mission comes in, and of course we can build technology to make a difference. One of the biggest differences between us and, say, what you've heard about earlier is the disassociated nature of our partners. So rather than working with large national parks, we work with local groups, ones who are actually not paramilitarized. So this is one I'll get into a little more detail. This is a work we have in Brazil. If you look at Brazil, you'll see this sort of ocean of deforestation, but these islands of pretty intact forest. And actually, in this forest, these are not protected areas like Kruger or the rest. These are actually indigenous reserves, areas where the indigenous tribes have been given the rights to protect their area by Brazil. But of course, they don't have a great deal of help in doing that. This is the Tembe territory. This red outline, it's about 2,500 square kilometers of forest. This is the Tembe tribe themselves. There's about 1,500 of them left, and they are entirely kind of stuck in these left and right areas because this purple area is entirely occupied by illegal loggers, drug cartels, and illegal settlers. And even just going from one town to the next, and again, these are just a tribe who lives in this area. Going from one town to the next, they'll run across full-scale logging trucks. The only thing they can really do in this situation is get out of there as fast as possible. And so you can see that their area, even though it is legally theirs, is entirely out of their control. At least it was in 2014 when we first got to know them. So the Tembe themselves, realizing this was an existential crisis for them, they got 30 young rangers, trained them, and put them together. This was not a government-trained force. These are not the police. These are the Tembe themselves in a lawless area, attempting to impose some degree of law and order. And that's, of course, what we depend upon. So let's look at what this actually looks like. So this area is huge. Cell phone service tends to extend about 15 to 20 kilometers. But if you're on the ground, not so much. Each one of these dots you see here is actually a cell phone tower. But even the distance from here to here is a good 10, 12 kilometers. And so in order to make this work, and of course with the local groups, this technology that you saw us building, we call them Guardians, these sensors, we got them to actually build them. So here's a video of the tribe actually helping to put together some of this hardware. And then to deal with getting it into an area where we could potentially make a difference, we ended up putting it high up in trees and teaching them to climb high into trees. Because up in trees, you're able to get better sunlight, so they can last essentially for forever. And of course, you get better cell phone service at great distance. So in this case, this one was one put along a road to detect trucks on the way in, potentially, and chainsaws, and to pick up the sound, pick up the cell phone service from nearly 20 kilometers away. So again, just to recap on what the system is before we get into the example of this working, the moment a chainsaw goes off from the forest, picks up the sound, goes through the API, and sends an alert to local partners on the ground. So this is what this looks like in the interfaces of our system. This is who are familiar. Everybody can hear the chainsaw here. But of course, this chainsaw is only at about 200 or 300 meters away. So this is a test that was done. In reality, threat detection is, you're looking at much greater areas. But that, of course, is one of the advantages of acoustics, is that you can hear things that are much further away. A camera trap, of course, can pick things up that are right in front of you. But as you all know, acoustics is great at picking up threats at great distance. So just to get into actual data from this area, this is an actual detection of a chainsaw from the area. Hopefully some of you can hear that. All of you can hear that. But it goes without saying that it's much more subtle. And this is where the use of convolutional neural network, AI, running in the cloud is really critical. So just to give a quick recap on this, the way our system works is that it will send all of the audio 24/7 up to the cloud, and we're actually doing that analysis in the cloud and sending a real-time alert within maybe 1 or 2 minutes to locals on the ground. These are those same Tembe Rangers using a Ranger app that we built for them. And this is what it kind of looks like. So they're able to get that alert within a couple of minutes of the chainsaw going off. They have the opportunity to listen and confirm that they agree with it. This gets fed back into our system, of course, so that we can improve the machine learning models. And then this allows them to dispatch. So of the sounds you heard, allows to lead situations much like this. We're able to get the Tembe scrambled altogether out to the end of this road to intercept this truck on the way out. So in fact, there were well over 30 Rangers in that case, probably up to 40 or 50 at the end of the road.
Loaded up with wood.
And at the end of the road, of course, the Tembe were able to stop the loggers, seize the equipment, burn the trucks, to be honest, burn the other equipment that was there, and not so much arrest the loggers, so much as send them on their way. This is the extent to which they take their matters into their own hands, because there is no law and order in this area. There's no police, there's no military support, at least not originally, and so the Tembe themselves have to do this to protect their land, and of course us, by working with them, they're able to carry out that mission for us. It's really important to us that nobody gets hurt, and so it's important that we get them to respond as quickly as possible and lower the stakes. But just to back up for a second, these guys, these are not, military police. They are not park guards. They're not trained in that way. They're just trying to protect their own land. But in doing so, they can have a huge, huge impact on these issues that matter to the rest of us, whether it be climate change, whether it be protection of ecosystems. And so really, some of the best things that we can do is build tools to help these guys on the ground do it. I mean, this one guy may have a bigger effect on fighting climate change than a dozen engineers at Tesla or a clean tech company, just based on what they do. And so it's incumbent on us to make a difference. So you saw a few examples of us implementing this around the world. In fact, we put this into 14 countries across 5 continents already. And even now with COVID, of course, is majorly, is a big pressure on everyone. It's been hard to get into the field, but the need is increasing. The pressure on these environmental areas is definitely increasing. And so we are expanding into 5 new regions and fanning out across the world to expand into more over the next week. Here's some other examples of it being used. This one's in Peru. This one's back in Brazil. Here's Indonesia, where they're able to actually facilitate busts on illegal logging operations. So in all these situations, it's important to be producing evidence so the police can get involved, but these are not guards or police themselves. These are local communities that can be leveraged to make a difference. And that's the essence of our partnership. Cheap technology, existing infrastructure through cell phone networks, and the ability to work with people who are already there to stop what amounts to illegal and destructive activity from which nobody benefits. But ultimately, a system like ours, where again, it is about that flow of audio data up through everything, is not just about catching threats. If you're doing this, you should be able to create every single guardian, every single device you put up in the trees, essentially is a live audio feed from these remote places. And so we've released this app that allows anybody around the world to kind of listen in and enjoy it. This one's been out for a while, and we figure a lot of this is about trying to build extra value in what's there. So thinking broadly about what this Rainforest Connection RFCX system is, we like to think of it as a nervous system for the natural world, right? It's not just about a device that's up there. It's not just about sending the alert to people to stop it. Those are just 2 ends of one system. At the end, it's about that flow, that workflow all the way through. How can we make audio into a rich way to understand what's there? It begins with sensation, capturing the acoustics, getting that up into a cloud API automatically and in real time, having it be organized and queryable. Perception is what we saw before. How do you perceive what's there? I perceive there's a chainsaw. I can hear a chainsaw, a gunshot, a vehicle. These are all the things you can do. But even that's not enough. Just knowing there's a chainsaw, just knowing there's a gunshot, doesn't amount to actionable intelligence. And so that's where cognition comes in. What does it all mean? So I sense it. We perceive there to be something that's there, all in parallel. The cognition tells us is really an additional higher level AI to help you figure out what is actually happening. What does it mean? And then, of course, the most important is response. We take responsibility for all 4 of these, and that's an increasingly difficult and creative thing to take on. But again, by virtue of all this, by automating all this, we are really attempting to show that this data can be used for so many different things, and we're going to talk about some of those. So this is the web dashboard that allows anybody to sort of see it. Here's a live feed, not live right now. We'll get into some demos in a bit. This is a feed of audio coming out of Sumatra. Nobody needs to be attuned to the spectrogram, as you see here. But of course, within this, there's so much more. This that you see right here is actually a vehicle, but there's a lot of other stuff happening in this spectrogram that we would like to leverage the same system to apply at scale. And that's where this interface that we will show in a little bit makes it possible for anybody while using it to annotate data right there. So if you happen to be somebody who's listening for chainsaws, and you can, of course, annotate for gibbons. Every single one of those labels or annotations can then be fed directly into a pattern matching system in a tool called Arbimon that we make for scientists and bioacoustics professionals for free. That's what this is. That pattern matching, which by the way, you should all use this for free. We just released it for free 3 weeks ago. Just by annotating a single one, you can sort of search through your entire data set, whether it be an hour, a month, a week, a year, all that stuff. It makes it very fast to search through it, pull out these examples of those calls. And when you're able to do this across a few species, then interfaces like this become possible. So in this case, of course, we are detecting those threats from vehicles, but it becomes very easy to build neural networks to recognize different species all at once across these spectrograms. And we're all about trying to build these experimental interfaces to make more sense of what's there. Because we can alert people to threats, but actually getting people to pay attention to the subtleties of what's happening can lead to so much more. So for example here, of course, we're showing that there are a few species. There's a vehicle and a few species that are here. Again, there's probably more within it that we want to pick out. But the extent to which we're able to go very, very precise, down to the second, and say this is the way in which the species are making calls at the same time, suddenly we're able to look at ecology at that very precise level, and then extrapolate it out to an hour, to a week, to a year, and actually look at this very, very precise data in a big data sense. And what are the ways in which species overlap or don't? What are the ways in which certain species avoid each other? What are the ways in which certain species affect each other? They're able to look at ecology of the forest in a big data sense and potentially see seed hypotheses. And of course, this leads to a greater sort of mission undertaking for us, which is to say, we can hear chainsaws, we can hear gunshots, but not every hunter makes noise when they're walking through the forest. Not every tiger or jaguar makes noise. If we want to be able to hear what's there, we have to listen to the animals that are making noise, to hear the things that they're telling us about what's happening. So here's a very brute force example of that, because we're still very early in this. But essentially to say that when these things are, even things that don't make noise, if I were to walk through the forest, I'm going to be pretty quiet, but you can be sure the other animals are talking about me. That's the extent to which we'd like to make use of these sort of fabric of the noise of these ecosystems to tell what's happening there. So here's an example. This is a project in Costa Rica where we're listening for spider monkeys. Spider monkeys are a critical animal in this ecosystem. They spread seeds, seed dispersal, and they're also critically endangered. But they also make lots and lots of noise during the day. And so there was, in fact, an instance where suddenly we were getting lots and lots of spider monkeys making noise at night. That didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it turned out that there was, in fact, a big event that occurred at night that woke them up. There was an earthquake in Costa Rica, as you can hear here. They began to shake the trees around. And again, as you saw these guardians up in trees, you can really hear the trees shaking. And that earthquake lasts for about 15 seconds, at which point all the spider monkeys wake up and begin yelling to each other for the better part of an hour. So again, this is very brute force. This is an example of an event that occurred we never would have known about if we hadn't seen some anomalous animal behavior in our system and gone to look for it. That's the sort of thing we'd like to take very precise to be able to look for other threats, whether it be hunters or other sorts of threats to the forest. And being able to measure the increases or decreases in biological activity over time is really about our impact measurement. If we hope to stop illegal logging and actually protect these areas, we have to make sure they're being legitimately measured, when measuring our impact over time as well. So again, going back to this type of nervous system for the world, this is the technical sort of overview of what that really means. It really is very cloud-based. We do, of course, build a number of apps to get into. It's all about how do we get data, heavy data. This was mentioned earlier. Acoustic data is heavy. How do we get this out of the most remote places up into our system and organize it, analyze it very quickly, and bring it back? But then on top of that, how do we make that data available in rich interfaces that you just saw so it can continue to be useful beyond the actual moment? But in doing this, it means that by building all this into this sort of cloud API sense, we're not necessarily limited to the sensors that we create. So here's an example of another project that we have in Vancouver. Again, we don't build hydrophones. We don't work underwater, but we did build a cloud-based system that allows audio to flow in, to run on analysis, and for insights to be spit out more or less in real time. So here's an example of a DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada, who's streaming audio from Vancouver Bay. This is the city of Vancouver, very large city. But orcas and humpbacks frequently come into this area, and you know, it's important to know that so they can clear the shipping channels. So based on those streams that are coming in, you can see that this is actually, it alerted us, and then the moment that orcas were able to come in, orcas came into this area, they were able to get an alert on the app the exact same way those indigenous rangers in Brazil did, and go out and actually clear this lane. And this is an example of good collaboration. So we didn't build this detection model. Google did. They had an engineer at Google that built a humpback and orca detector. We didn't create the audio stream. That was done by the government in Canada, in Vancouver. And we also didn't deal with the response. We just facilitated all these pieces coming together to achieve impact. And that's what we hope to do. So again, our main bread and butter is, of course, terrestrial acoustic monitoring in remote places. These are the areas that we are sort of existing in throughout the world right now. We're hoping that all of these tools, this whole platform, becomes a way by which scientists and bioacoustic people can start to worry about the actual science and not the amount of data that they have. But just based on our actual monitoring, of course, we will, over the next year, we hope to triple our impact with 6,000 square kilometers forest more. And increasingly, just the amount of data that we're gathering, almost this audio Noah's Ark of what the ecosystems, how they exist right now. There's so much golden stuff within that. And we're saving all of it to make it available to scientists, including you. And so I hope you can actually talk more about how you might use this platform and, of course, how you think we should improve it. Beyond actually just sort of showing you slides, I'd also love to be able to give you little demos of this sort of platform in and of itself, since we have extra time, because I speak rather quickly. And if you have any questions, you can interject with that right now, because at the end of the day, my background is not in ecology. My background is not even really in conservation until this organization. It's really much more in physics and software engineering, and that's the specialty of our actual team. So how is it that, why can we not take these huge data sets, like the ones of decades upon decades of audio, and make them available in a rich interface just like this, so that almost like the Google Earth for time series acoustic data? How would you explore that? So we can, as you saw in the other interface, how we can interlay species detections right over top of that. And at the same time, if you want to really get in there and explore, these are gibbon calls. I love Sumatra, by the way. But really can sort of zoom in and really see what's there, or zoom out and view these things over a longer period of time. Here's an example of the exact same killer whale model that you saw. Again, killer whales don't show up in Vancouver all the time. They show up pretty rarely. In fact, they only show up maybe a couple times in a year. There's no way that people are going to be able to sit around and listen for it. But because we're running all these analytics on incoming data at every given moment, it's very easy for us to map it out and say, wow, these are the moments when those whales actually showed up. These are the moments when there was super gathering. Same for humpbacks. These are the moments when humpbacks came in. To do that analysis like all at once would actually be difficult, but because we're doing it in real time, it's pretty fast. And again, to make interfaces that allow someone to really explore what's there, that's what we're trying to do. So again, this is also a Sumatran feed. This one's relatively real time. Let's give it a slightly different spectrogram. These are all very early interfaces that we want to make available. But by the same token, I can zoom in here and say, I know this is a gibbon call. Well, let's wait for it to load up a little bit. It's a little slow. Meanwhile, I will search for, let's see, I love siamangs. And anybody, whether it be a citizen scientist or the rest, can suddenly be able to sort of annotate this data. And then the moment that annotation is made, it can be kicked off into the Arbonne interface to suddenly scan the entire the entire database for it. And it gets better the more annotations that we have. But the idea is to simplify the gateway into insight in the data and to build cool, fun interfaces for getting there. But going back to threat detection for just 1 second, pardon me. These are the ways by which we can look at it. So even if it is a gunshot. So for example, last week, let's see, on the 27th of October in Sumatra, gunshots were detected in the forest, which is actually quite novel. You can hopefully hear that. These are the interfaces that allow our partners to actually review and confirm these things. By the same token, you can see, let's look for chainsaws that went off over the same period of time, over the past 2 weeks, and becomes a collaborative platform. Again, nothing fancy, doesn't need to be too fancy, but we know that our partners on the ground are reviewing it and confirming that yes, this was a chainsaw. And the moment that they confirm that, it's on them to actually respond. And so that's the two-way communication, similar to what was described in ShotSpotter. The two-way communication for making sure that they make the most of that. There are still chainsaws happening right now in Bukit Banyo, like for example, just over the past few hours. And so our team is following up with them on the ground right now to make sure that something is being done about this, or that they have chosen explicitly not to. So ultimately, no solution for detection is entirely sufficient for stopping it. But it's that real-time information and the two-way communication with the partners that makes the difference. Yeah, I guess I can go into some other examples, but all I can say at the end is that for you scientists and bioacousticians out there, these platforms are entirely free. You may have a year of audio or 1 hour. Put it in and use it, and let us know how you can pull what you want out of it, and we can build these tools together. And also, by the way, here's one example of the same Guardian. I think I did actually leave it on. So in the same interface, you can see, you can hopefully hear me giving my talk again. The rights to protect their area by Brazil, but of course they don't have a great deal of help in doing that. This is the 10-bit. So it just kind of goes to show how more or less real-time this system is, even whether it be from the rainforest or whether it's from right here at the computer, a device that's being held up. So the cheaper we can make the hardware, the more connected we can make it so that people can focus on the insights and the difficult problems and not just how to move bits and bytes around. That's what we're focused on, and hopefully we can do it with you. Thanks.